Good morning. We're so glad you joined us today. If you're a guest, we want to extend a special welcome to you. We also want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about who we are and about some of the things coming up here at Trinity. When you came in, you should have received a worship folder. In your worship folder, you'll find a connection card like this. We use these cards as a simple way to stay connected. If you're a regular attender, we already know that you use these cards as a way to hear your feedback, to pray for you, and be a part of what's happening in your life. If you're a guest, we'd love for you to use this card as a way to start a relationship with us. You can simply fill it out to the level of your comfort, and later on in the services, you can drop it in the offering basket or take it to our guest services center in the lobby. You can find a lot of info on your worship folder about what is happening at Trinity, but here are some highlights.
One of the most exciting things we do at Trinity is baptism. Baptism is an important step for anyone who considers themselves to be a Jesus follower. Take a look at this. If you have questions about baptism or you're ready to be baptized, come to the baptism class or mark your connection card. If you have questions about the Christian faith, if you are a new Christian, or you are returning to church for the first time in a long time, we have an 8-week conversational environment that is just for you. It's called Starting Point. Today is your last chance to sign up for Starting Point, so mark your connection card. We want to make sure we have your materials ready for you. If you have any questions, you can always visit our website. We've got an event coming up for everyone at Trinity. Many of you have been reading books we made available last month in preparation for our Generations event. Generations is coming up, and it will be a great chance to learn how each of our generations at Trinity can reverberate and make a difference in this valley. Join us Friday, March 3rd at 6:30. You can find more info on our website. For those of you who are members of Trinity, we want to let you know about our quarterly ministry update. The quarterly ministry update is a chance for us to talk about the nuts and bolts and to get an update on the budget. Lunch and childcare are provided, so come join us.
That's all the announcements this morning. Thanks for watching. We're so glad you're here. If you're a guest, make sure you stop by our guest services center in the lobby for your free gift. It's just our way to say that you're really glad you joined us this morning. If you'd like more info about anything going on at Trinity, you can connect with us online. Enjoy the rest of your morning.
All right, good morning. So Jeff said that was all the announcements, but I have one other quick announcement. We're in the process of transitioning our library and kind of liquidating all the books there. And so if you're interested, they're for sale last Sunday. They're for sale in the foyer, $1 a piece. So swing by there and see if there's anything that grabs you. Okay. Well, this morning, it's good to be with you. It's good to worship. It's good to get our head around God's love for us. This has been a week where we celebrate love, right? And there are various levels of expectation for Valentine's Day and what it's going to be like, and I'm sure your expectations were or were not met this week, one or the other. One of the things, I do a lot of premarital counseling, and one of the things that marks everyone who comes through the doors pretty much And I have an inventory that I provide them with. I have them take this inventory so I can kind of validate this, that one of the common traits of every couple who comes through the doors that I talk with is they all have an idealized view of marriage. They all have an overly idealized, rosy picture of what it's really like to be married. And so my job is to bring that picture down a little bit closer to reality, because research says that couples who have proper expectations of what it's really like to be married and they kind of understand the rough spots, they're a lot happier than couples with these distorted, idealized understandings of what marriage is really like. So one of the things I do is I have couples read a particular article that kind of helps them understand your expectations in a marriage relationship are important and they're directly related to your satisfaction in that relationship. The other thing I have them do is independently, each of them, I want you to come back next time we get together, I want you to list 10 things that could go wrong in your marriage. And they can't talk about them with each other, and they come back and they have 10 things, ultimately 20 different things that could go wrong in a marriage relationship, and it's helpful. They come up with things like infertility and losing your job and not getting along with the in-laws. I mean, things that really happen, but they haven't really thought about them. All the way to serious things like cancer and adultery and all kinds of things that can actually happen. And once they have that list, it's not a lot of fun to come up with, but once you have this list, you're better prepared to preserve your marriage, because you know that it's not going to be easy and it's going to take focused work and effort. Probably the other most idealized relationship I know of is the relationship that people want to have with their church. That's the other most idealized relationship that people think of attending and then ultimately being part of, committing to a faith family, and they think that it's going to be one continuously warm and nurturing relationship with all these other people who love Jesus. And how could people who love Jesus ever disappoint you or get on your nerves or even sin against you? How could that ever happen? And we forget that the same people who make up marriages are the same people who make up churches. And what we need to understand is that the same level of effort that's required to maintain a healthy family, biological family, is the same kind of effort that it takes to preserve a healthy faith family. And we don't understand that, and we're not prepared to make the effort towards that, we experience disappointment and worse than that. So John reminds us that of what it really means to love each other. John says this, "Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but in deeds, with actions and in truth." So we don't just love each other with our words and in an idealized way, that we really need to love each other with actions. We need to put out the effort that it takes to show love for each other. And that's what we're in the process of talking about as a faith family in this series called God's Church, Your Family. We're talking about now, after we've talked about what it means to be part of, that we've been put in a faith family, we're talking about how to really flesh out love for each other. Practical ways. 3 Sundays, last week, this week, next week. Three different ways that we live out love in the faith family that God has put us in. When you turned to Jesus, you weren't just saved, you didn't just have your sins forgiven, you didn't just have your relationship with God repaired. One of the things that happened when you turned to Jesus and received salvation is you were familified. You were put into God's family with God as your father, brothers and sisters and other believers as your brothers and sisters. And then the concrete expression of that, the place where that is really worked out, is in a local church. And in that local church, we really have to live out that family bond. And we talked last week about the fact that means going low and serving each other. That's one of the ways we love in actions, not just in words. We go low and serve each other. This morning, we're going to talk about not serving each other, but preserving. Not serving, but preserving. We're going to talk about preserving unity in the faith family. And we're going to talk about the most important thing that you and I can do to preserve unity in our faith family. Unity in the church is so important that it was one of Jesus' very last prayers for you and me before he was crucified. So the same night that Jesus washed the disciples' feet, which we looked at couple of times already this year. That same night, Jesus said, "A new command I give you, to love one another." That same night, he prayed, just moments before his betrayal, moments before his arrest. And one of the things he prayed for is unity, that you may be one. And he wasn't just praying for his 11 followers now. He explicitly says, "I'm not just praying for them, I'm praying for everyone who comes after them." So Jesus prayed for us. And one of the things that he prayed for us, this collection of faith family of Jesus followers, is he prayed for our unity. Unity is one of the ways that the world around us knows that Jesus is alive and well, and we are his true followers, by the level of unity that takes place in the faith family. But so many times that is not what happens in so many local churches. It's not like that. So many times local churches are divided and they are splintered. They have this chronic low-grade fever of disunity. Chronic low-grade fever, just never feeling very good, And when you're never feeling very good, you never get around to doing what you're supposed to do, which is make disciples. And you never really display that one family trait that's supposed to mark every Jesus follower and every group of Jesus followers: selfless love. And when you have this low-grade fever of complaining and disunity and grumbling and pettiness, you never really function the way that Jesus wants his people to function and the way that he prayed that we would function. It's so important to preserve unity in the faith family. A few years ago at the Trinity's men's retreat, which, by the way, we're having a men's retreat this spring, the very last Friday, Saturday in April. And so that's going to be fun. Put it on your calendar, guys. A couple of years ago at a men's retreat, we were up at the same camp, going to the same place, and that's where our middle schoolers are today. They're at winter camp up at Meadowwood Camp, which is where we'll go for our men's retreat. We were up there a few years ago, and I looked up and I saw what we're talking about this morning. I saw it all in one picture. And we were outside with some guys, we were just talking, and I looked up at the lodge and I looked at the light that was up at the top. And I noticed that there was something wrong with that light. And if you get a little bit of closer look, you can see that it has something inside it, but it's not a light bulb. Do you know what it is? It's a hornet's nest, okay? And now that is a metaphor. That is a lot of churches. They are supposed to be places of light, but really they're just a hornet's nest. You know that this can be true. And there's actually something you and I can do about that, something we can do to make sure that that doesn't happen here at Trinity. Because there's one thing more than anything else that can preserve unity in the church and keep the hornets from building a nest. And if churches around the world would practice this one discipline, it would preserve unity, and it would display God's primary trait of love to the world. It would help the world see that we are authentic Jesus followers and he is alive and well. It would promote the health of the church. The hope of the world depends on the health of the church. And if the church just walks around all the time just not feeling very good, it's never going to get around to delivering the good news to the people who need it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So much depends on it. So let's go to an important passage on unity. Open your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians 4 is an important passage. It has a lot of great teachings in it, but there are a couple things that really kind of tie it all together. And it really is a classic passage on the healthy functioning of the church. And Paul says, he's describing the healthy functioning of a church, and he describes a couple of the things that Jesus followers need to do to maintain that healthy functioning. Chapter 4, verse 2. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit Let me read that again. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. And then Paul, after saying, make every effort to preserve unity, he goes on to say, why? Because there's one body, just one Spirit, just one, not lots, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Paul says, listen, the truth is there's unity. There's one. God has already set up unity. There's one God, one Spirit. God has called all of us into one body. There's one faith, not lots of them. And so God has already set us up for unity. But it's up to us to preserve it. It only makes sense for us to preserve unity because we have one Lord. We have one faith. We shouldn't be divided. We have one mission. And that oneness should show up in our faith-family relationships. But for it to show up, we have to do what Paul says, and we have to make every effort. It's not going to happen by accident. It only will happen as we intentionally pursue unity. And unity is important, and it's kind of tough to preserve because we're all different. And really the only thing we have in common is Jesus. But we're supposed to work together, even though Jesus is really the only thing that brings us together. If you read on in the chapter, Paul goes on to talk about why unity can be a challenge. He says, because we all have different gifts. We all have different personalities. We all have different abilities, but we're supposed to function together as one body. So one body has lots of parts. That's good. That's important. That's what a body needs. Lots of different parts to do lots of different things, but that can also make unity a challenge. But the hope of the world depends on it. So Paul says, listen, you got to make every effort to preserve it. You can think of it like this. If you really have to, unity is something you have to fight for. You have to fight for unity. And if you're going to fight for unity, there's one thing you have to guard above all else. There's one unity destroyer that can wreck relationships, divide believers, cripple the mission. It's the number one threat to unity in the church. That means it's the number one threat to unity at Trinity. It's the number one thing that we have to guard against. And Paul seems to have it on his mind as he's writing about the healthy functioning of the church because he brings it up 4 different times. So I want to show you 4 verses, and I want to see if you see what this thing is that we have to guard if we want to maintain unity in the faith family. Instead, speaking the truth in love, verse 15 says, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. Verse 25 says, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbor, for we are all members of one body. Verse 29, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And verse 31, get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander. I don't know if you can see the thread in those 4 different places in chapter 4, but the one thing that ties these 4 verses together is communication. How we talk to each other, and how we talk about each other. It comes up 4 times in this passage on unity and the healthy functioning of the body. Because communication, how we listen to each other, how we talk to each other, it can either build up or destroy. It can either be constructive or destructive in a church. And if you've spent any time in a church, you know how true this is. How we listen and how we talk has a direct impact on the quality of our relationships, has a direct impact on the health of our church. It has a direct impact on the health of our mission and the reputation of Jesus. How we listen, how we talk. So, if we want to preserve unity in our faith family, then we have to practice. We have to make every effort to practice loving speech. Loving speech. Actually, the first time I talked about loving speech and how important our speech is as it relates to our unity was 24 years ago this spring. My very first year at Trinity, I knew that one of the things that we needed to talk about was how to talk to each other and how to talk about each other. And we actually used this passage to help us understand how we're to relate to each other. And several times since then, every healthy church has to be reminded of what helps it be healthy. And so, from time to time, over the past 24 years, we've talked about healthy communication. We want to build a culture of healthy, loving communication in our church, that we understand what it looks like, and we practice it because we know how important it is. And it's one of the things that has helped our church have the ministry that it's been able to have, because we have people who are committed to practicing loving speech. So by way of reminder for some, but all of us need this reminder, and maybe some of this is even it will be new for you this morning. I want to talk about 5 marks of loving speech, unity-preserving speech in the faith family. 5 different marks. And the first 2 actually are going to come from outside this passage. And the reason I'm going outside of Ephesians 4 is because James, Jesus' brother, is Jesus' brother who didn't believe in Jesus before the resurrection. After the resurrection, kind of hard to argue with, that my brother said he was God, and then I saw him crucified on the cross, and then I saw him alive again. And so James the skeptic, Jesus' brother, becomes James, who writes the book of James. And if you know much about the book of James, you know it's a very practical book. Well, James has very practical instruction on how believers ought to speak to each other and the kind of communication we ought to have. And he tells us in James chapter 1 such great principles. He tells us in James chapter 1, verse 19, he says this: "My dear brothers," stop, family card, right? We're getting good at that. "My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." 2 principles right here from this passage in James before we go back to Ephesians 4. Because these 2 principles are overarching, and really everything we're going to say applies to every context where we communicate. Marriage, work, certainly the church. The first principle that James gives us is everyone should be quick to listen. Now, we don't necessarily think of listening as communication, communication. We always like to think of it being us talking. That's communication, is when I get to talk. But actually, James says, no. Good communication starts with listening, not talking. It starts with listening. And I'm not going to give you a sermon on how to listen, but I'll tell you how important it is to listen. That one of the quickest ways to take all the oxygen out of a disagreement, whether it's a political disagreement, or it's between you and your spouse, or it's between you and some other relationship. One of the quickest ways to just remove all the fuel from that disagreement is just to listen. If you will listen, if you and your spouse, you're kind of butting heads, and if you would just stop and listen and say, "Please explain to me why you feel this way and help me understand." I want to really, and those aren't just words, but it's a genuine effort on your part to get inside their mind and understand where they're coming from. That is so powerful, and that just removes the fuel from so many disagreements. You find out there really isn't anything to talk about once someone just feels understood. And listening to someone being listened to is how we feel understood. Listening forces us to empathize with someone if you're really listening. It forces us to empathize. It forces us to understand. And it allows the other person to feel like finally they're being heard. That's so much of what all of us just want. I just want to be heard. I want someone to understand where I'm coming from. Listen, it's one of the basic of all human needs to be understood. And if we will just listen to each other, we'll be able to do that. So, the first thing to remember about healthy communication in a faith family is, you know what? What if we just started by listening? Not preparing our response, but genuinely trying to enter into where the other person's at. We have a disagreement. We experienced the same event and saw it very differently. All right, instead of arguing about how we saw it, what if we entered into really trying to understand the other person's perspective? So that's the first step. You might think that's Simple Simon stuff, but I'll tell you, this is one of the most powerful ways that we can build love in our faith family. So what if we were known as a people who could really listen to each other? What if one of the marks of the people of Trinity was, one of the ways we demonstrated love for each other was by really listening? Especially when we're working out a disagreement. That would be a huge deposit towards preserving unity. So be quick to listen. The second is kind of the inverse of that. The second thing is James says. He says, be quick to listen, but then be slow to speak. So what if we slowed down our speech just for the purpose of increasing the lag time between the time a thought enters our head and comes out our mouth? Just to build a few extra barriers, a few milliseconds between that thought and it coming out our mouth. Slow to speak. There's a great picture of what it means to be slow to speak that comes from the movie Zootopia. And I don't know how much setup you need for the movie clip, but it's a rabbit who's a lady who's a cop. And the rabbit, lady cop, is named Judy, and she's trying to solve a mystery. She's trying to solve a mystery, and she's in a hurry. And so she goes to the local Department of Motor Vehicles in a hurry because she needs some information in order to solve this mystery, and I'll let you watch it from here.
Flash, 100-yard dash. Buddy, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, too.
Hey, Flash, I'd love you to meet my friend. Darling, I've forgotten your name.
Officer Judy Hobbs, CPD, how are you?
I am doing just
Fine?
as well as I can be. What
Hang in there.
can I do
Well, I was hoping you could run a play.
for you
Well, I was hoping you could.
today?
Well, I was hoping you could run a play for us. We are in a really big hurry.
Sure. What's the plate
29 T
number?
29 THD03.
Two 9
THD03.
T
HD03.
H
D03.
D
03.
0.
3.
Hey, Flash, want to hear a joke?
No!
Sure.
What do you call a three-humped camel?
I don't know. What do you call
Three-humped camel.
three-humped camel?
Pregnant.
Yes, very funny.
Okay, I don't know if that's exactly what it looks like, but something like that. Where we have lots of time to think about something before we blurt it out. And we're slow to speak. We have lots of time to think about something before we text it, or email it, or Facebook it. We have lots of time to think about its impact and its appropriateness. Well, how slow should I talk? Well, slow enough to make sure that every response is appropriate. And sometimes that might even mean you don't say anything at all. Nothing? Right. Just don't say anything. And what if you applied this to every arena in which you communicate? One of the things that someone said to me in between services is, well, you know what? I don't do any other social media. I don't do anything. And I thought, you know what? It made me think of the verse in Proverbs that says, I don't remember exactly where it is, but basically a bunch of words gives you more opportunity to cause offense. And really, the more social media you got, the more places, I'm not saying it's wrong, it's not wrong, but the more places you have to trip yourself up, right? I mean, I have one thing, I do Twitter, and that has doubled my opportunities to make offense and cause offense. So, what if we were just slow to speak? And we were thoughtful about the things we said and the things we wrote. Be quick to listen, but then let's be slow to speak. And then, the third principle, back in Ephesians chapter 4, loving communication is also truthful. We see that come up in 2 of the 4 verses that where Paul brings up communication. In verse 15, he says this, instead, speaking the truth in love. He's talking about how the members of the church edify and build up each other. And he says, we speak the truth in love. Speaking the truth in love. If we want to preserve unity in our church, we have to be brave enough and loving enough to tell the truth. And you can tell the truth and still love somebody. As a matter of fact, telling the truth is one of the ways that you love somebody. By telling them the truth. Paul says that we tell each other the truth because we are members of the same body. Each of you put off falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbor, for we are all members of one body. And body parts don't lie to each other. The body needs all the parts to tell it the truth, because if all the parts don't tell the body the truth, the body can get itself in a dangerous situation. You're up at night, middle of the night, and you need to walk across your living room, and it's dark, and all the lights are out, and your eyes tell your feet, don't worry, I got this. I'm sure it's going to be fine. Let's just go ahead. And your feet say, okay, and then halfway through the living room, you step on a Lego, or you kick your big toe into the table, and your toes say, eyes, I thought you told us you could see. And the eyes are like, well, we can't really see. It's dark in here, but we didn't really want to cause offense. And so we said, just go ahead. And your toe says, you know what? You didn't serve me well, right? By not telling me what was true about what you saw. The body, the whole body, Trinity, we need to speak truthfully. And truth and love are not, they're not mutually exclusive. We can speak lovingly and also truthfully. One of my visions for a healthy church, one of I think the measures of a healthy church is how sensitive a matter can you talk about? And still people treat each other with love. And really a healthy church should be able to talk about any subject at all. Any subject. And deal with it straightforwardly and truthfully. Because we speak the truth in love. Slow to speak. Quick to listen, slow to speak, truthful, useful. The next thing we see is verse 29, where Paul talks about this important idea of being useful. And look at all the ways he goes, all the different ways he takes a stab at useful speech. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. Stop right there. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, or out of your fingers, or out of your phone. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful. Stop there. Oh, what an interesting idea, right? Only what is helpful. What is helpful for building others up. Building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. What a concept in our culture, right? to not have any unwholesome word come out of our mouth, but only words that are constructive, that meet needs, that build people up. Paul reminds us that our words are powerful and we can tear someone down or we can build them up. We can tear a church down or build a church, a faith family up by our words. So much power. And so Paul says, listen, use the power of words for things that are useful, that build up, that meet needs, that serve people well. And that should be the purpose of all of our speech. And that rules out a lot of things that come out of our mouths and our fingers. It rules out negative speech. It rules out snide comments. It rules out complaining and grumbling. And one especially destructive form of speech that Paul singles out in verse 31 is what he calls slander. He has this list of things. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, and slander. And slander is it's a communication word. And slander means this. It's any negative speech about another person. Any negative speech about another person, whether it's true or not. Well, hey, I said it. It was true. Why can't I say it if it's true? Any negative speech about another person, whether it's true or not, unless your responsibility as a believer requires it. Unless your responsibility requires it. And that's a high standard. But if churches, if Jesus followers would practice this standard and measure our speech by this standard, it would be make huge strides towards preserving loving unity in the church. And the degree to which people practice and tolerate slander is a pretty good indicator of the degree of functionality or dysfunctionality that there is in that faith family. So speech that is useful. And finally, speech that is loving. And that just comes from verse 15 where Paul says, instead that we're to speak the truth in love. We've already said love and truth are not exclusionary. So we speak the truth in love. And so when we speak the truth in love, we speak to each other in a way that reflects the high value that we put on our relationships, the high value that we put on each other. It reflects the high level of commitment that we bring to the relationship. That's what it means when we speak truth in love. We speak in love. So, as a faith family, what if we were quick to hear, but slow to speak? And only use words that are truthful and useful and loving. And we said, this is how we talk. This is how we talk about each other. It's how we talk to each other. This is how we preserve unity in the faith family. There are all kinds of other things that you could do to preserve unity. You could come up with a nice, clear doctrinal statement that doesn't have any loopholes in it, make sure everyone agrees to it, right? You could have bylaws that control everything that happens in a quarterly ministry update or a church business meeting. I mean, you could do all these things, but really all we need is speech that is quick to listen, slow to speak, truthful, useful, loving. You can't legislate that. You have to practice it as a faith family. And it's easy to move away from it. So we all need to be reminded on a regular basis, especially in our culture where this is not the way our culture communicates. We need to have a different kind of culture as a faith family. We practice a different standard for communicating with each other. And it's not the standard that's practiced by our society at large, but it's the standard that we practice because it marks us as Jesus followers. Two quick comments. One I've kind of made throughout, but it's that these principles should apply to all communication. In the first century, when James and Paul wrote these words, the only way people communicated was normal, common folk like you and me. They just used words. But now, we don't just use words. We have computers and phones and tablets and all kinds of ways now of communicating. And so it's more complicated for us. But the same principles apply to all of our communication, verbal and digital. And the second comment is that we not only preserve unity when we practice these principles, We also preserve unity when we stop someone who's not practicing them. And that could be kind of uncomfortable, but that's something that we need to be able to do. So if you want a tool, you're like, I don't even know how to do that. Here's a little tool for your toolbox. Just sometimes it's appropriate just to say, why are you telling me this? Why are you telling me this? My responsibility as a Jesus follower is not about hearing this, and yours is not about, you don't have to be, but just that one statement, you just stop there. Why are you telling me this? There's probably someone better that you should talk to about this, okay? And you not only preserve unity by how you speak, but also by how you allow people to talk to you. And the health of our church and the hope of the world depends on unity. And when you walk into the church, when the people of this valley encounter the people of this church, do we want them to be walking into light or into a hornet's nest? We want to be light to this valley. We want to be health and love to this valley. And so we guard unity by the way we speak. And so when someone in the valley comes to you and says, why do the people at your church talk like this? You say, because we really love each other, and we want to keep it that way. Let's pray. Father, you have done so much for us. You have made us all brothers and sisters. You've made us one. You've taken us from different economic backgrounds and social backgrounds and racial backgrounds and political leanings. And you've given us something way more important that we have in common than any of these other things, and that is life in Jesus, a place at your table in your family. And we want to live out this unified truth, this truth of the fact that we are one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all. We want to reflect that oneness. We want to reflect this family trait that points to you as our Father, that our selfless love for each other. And so we need to be reminded by your Spirit who lives in us. We need to be reminded about how we speak to each other, how we speak about each other. And so raise our sensitivity level, continue to build a culture in this faith family of loving speech. And if there are things that need to be talked about, that we talk about them to the right people with the right kind of love. And so help us to practice this and build this in us so that we can be a place of health, we can be a place of light, and we can bring the hope of the world to this valley and beyond. And we ask you to do this in us through your Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.